Hello, my name is Anthony Walt, and I have revealed the new nature of evidences. You see my last live stream? I should put a link to Judge Napolitano's in this too, because in other words, all the online judges, but they have to have a nature that is going to afford that quality of fact keeping nature that does not leave out how we have black people's rights of eyes. And so I'm calling this new nature of evidences the hyper evidential. Where we have the hyper evidential, we know that there were other natures of laws too, involved when there was witch trials, where there were witch trials as subjects, and there's still witch trials as subjects in a witch trials house next to the founding location. One of the founding locations, the one that one of the ones George Washington had to come to and counter extort right before the last battle of the Revolutionary War, using James Madison's plan, with the founders behind him, before the first president who agreed to use that plan, vaccines. But they had to leave slavery entrenched northern colonies and southern colonies because it was a breaching method that was sensing everyone collusions with itself or counters to, help and reactions to what that cause and keep. That would also be collusions with itself. Otherwise, that body would be sensed in them and everyone around them. And that was sustained. It was a perfected method from since before modern religious messengers came about. And there were a whole bunch of things that are more practical and probable to convict. Also, where the people of the religions have collusion with the people of the sciences, with their syntax and natures being and having been employed to keep other things, others ourselves, blamed. Right where our founders communicated for us to blame a human fact keeping nature breaching method. Right where our founders communicated for us to blame how they did not have free speech because everyone's speech was measured by a breaching method and maintained collusion /s with itself, including with all positive things and all negative, in the difference of that. And the difference in the hyper difference of that, we have ignored it. It's hyper and it appeared. In other words, so injunctive reliefs are greater than and more finite than the value of reparations while it has that value. For example, that's why they're making people defend logic and nature behind reparations, leaving out the actual predicate acts with facts method, and blaming other things, others, ourselves, exactly with the breaching method employed, and defending it as collusions with the names from off all campuses that have also the campuses collusions with that self-valued roles, natures of debate with uses of names. Who's positive? In other words, the premises treatments, the fact, human nature, quality aspects of nature. One thing fluent through it as self-valued rules with sequence shifts and how they get away with it relative to self-valued rules with that from the youngest ages. Forced, tricked, hurt, persuaded, right where you did not value it because you couldn't fathom the nature and method right through all differences as collusions with itself, spying, using all truths for lies, to screen actual motivations, which are criminal foreign influences / hypercriminal foreign influences. This breaching method has all groupings of humanity, all voicings about the groupings and differences of humanity, tact as through and as systems tactical ulterior from the one that is human species body of individual bodies with all group differences being demonstrated to, that is by that identity which generates other species' bodies with two eyes, and our own with two eyes, with qualities, aspects, of nature, distinct, non-distinct, simultaneously, but also that further slash hyper simultaneous. It's a distinct identity of conjunction to all parts of all things, even things made up, and then further to the group parts of it, and further to its simultaneous value the same way. Many vaccines, things. I teach those things. But so the plan is in other words, when we have people that speak for our nations because of their, where they speak about business and economics and positive and things positive and negative relative to that. Each one of those industries will tell you if you ask them correctly and bring out the subject to it, to say the hyper additional subjects at the same time. See, there are exceptions in exception nature that voices for industries cannot afford. There's an equality of fact shaping nature that nature longs us to speak, but not one could afford it, wearing a suit and tie counter or exception, and with the difference of that, entertained and used as is. Because this relativity to how how homes and suburbs were built before America's founders were even born. The design, where it was a torture, extortion, slavery method against everyone sickly distinctly from some ancient times. And there are proofs that it had already taken down a mountain in America. Even if that's not true, it is more practical and is more probable than what is convicted by people with American history regarding Native American rights, or the difference between that or our founders. Because they are part of our founders. And the other part of our founders, they had to be forced. And then presidents are in this, but no one had free speech yet. And they even had to go like this with what they declassified. And we have to interpret that, which nature is right here to help us do. We don't leave out black people's rights of eyes. And the breaching method simultaneously left out and replaced. Pace, prepare. So prepare everyone, because if you, in other words, just like a video game, we could draw this. These identities of logic. And they break relative to the, in other words, boxing, martial arts, and wrestling. And the science of sharing identity that we could use to put down hyper additional bonds with the rest of the species body with the same plant, landing where we want to be landed, and it doesn't. But no one knows that I want it, because everyone's looking at the economics and perspectives and things like that as is. So in other words, we have to do a plan that knows, like, if you want to, in other words, we could do great things if we ease that. We have countries that have suburbs that were designed before cars, and they have all natures of people speaking about serious and technology, but that's just lists, and there's appreciation of lists in ways they can't defend that and afford to discern the value of the Constitution. And simultaneously where and how and why we have rights that are too numerous to have to list them simultaneously. So you have exceptions where machines have intelligence, where they can deal with lists faster. You leave out how they can't even sense things. They can't even care about them because the people programming them by people who care about them. You think industries that where their voices aren't allowed to deal with the finite, honestly, aren't allowed to put on the hyperscope. Black pupils. We have the same color eyes, different color eyes projected to us by the identity of the hypersimultaneous itself. It shows us when it rains, there are no longer bugs all over the top of the water, constantly for food for fish that are no longer in the waters anyway. And most of them no longer there, underground, etc. In other words, not because of flooding, all that, you could do great things with temporary value/value progression. See the beaver. There are proofs that the beaver showed the Native Americans before they were broken from the hyper-native system that A through Z are broken from. Its identity relationship to itself, and the only increasing value of that simultaneously as means to discern an extent of its body, but how it is an identity of hyper-invisible conjunction, hyper-conjunction to as all things. Vaccines. But it makes us shush to hear. This is why you hear the shush sound, boxing gyms. In martial arts places. In other words, I don't know about if they have it in wrestling, but in other words, this is more probable and practical too than what is convicted by the names of the people of the sciences. And then they're also needed to be pretending it's personal rather than deal with those actual facts. How we draw them, how we discern them with the hyper-evidential is simultaneously showing that this as a body of relativity/hyper-relativity, but also a breaching method, a human fact, human nature breaching method as a scientific value. It is also an identity of relativity/hyper-relativity. That is denied. It's relativity to all subjects. And then through hyper-additional apparent and real motivations, nature's needs, interests, to effectively screen effective complete possession/hyper-possession over all natures of formal and overt criminal enterprises, private syntax nature, news at the same time, names at and next to body dumping spots. You think body dumping spots are about needing to keep illusions hid, needing to keep other things, others ourselves blamed for things that are really, even when it is others, then they blame. It is also a breaching method. Roles consciously sabotaging and having sabotaged our educations at countries A through Z. The difference between our own people as roles with that, or other countries, or overt criminal enterprises, or private ones, or the news. That difference, or the names at next to body dumping spots, corners of streets involved with predicate acts methods originally instilled. Self-value by people showing they need to hide that they had roles with that and how to get away with it, including people by pretending they dealt with crimes legitimately as collusion / as with all locations, be keeping people's mouths shut. In other words, so then they have there's a wounds all over the human species body in the earths as that design of infrastructure, let alone the cities. The suburbs were designed tactically to nature for torture, extortion, slavery, as what was entrenched northern colonies, southern colonies, and then America's founders were born. You guys have self-value rules with sequence shifts and roles with uses of knowledge of good and evil about American history to get over on what came first, to get over on what was entrenched, to get over on how it stayed entrenched, to get over on how we were told to explain that. That's what caused the North, that's what caused, and with that plan of our founders, which forced the North and South to fight while they were still entrenched with slavery, both sides. Then the North, and now the North still, and the South, they're still colluding, blaming it on, pretending the North was about freedom, where it wasn't. It was at the same time, but only to an extent. And where it was not about freedom, all the ways it was discernible, that was all used remotely by the breaching method. And it is when they speak, their logic and uses of their own names and others is. Their descriptions of hate, of love, criminal and ceaseless natures of positive treatments and negative treatments, truths used for lies, collusion /S, right, where we can discern it, black people. This is not black and white, there's black and white collusion /S with international police forms. Names of this human species body of individual bodies having been used as systems tactical ulterior. Certain type of victim /hyper victim that had already had this happen. This breaching method already took names A through Z, sickly distinctly. Torture, extortion, slavery method relative to where we are fact-cheating nature. So we could just instantly do a world YouTube video, or just do it to communicate and put down the hyper means, or I'll start stacking means and use when there are exceptions where we leave out, like we'll have Africa censor, because a whole bunch of people in Africa want to be one country per the Africa, I'm no, I know it's not simple like that. And that's why we put the exceptions. We appreciate exceptions, exception nature. Being and having been at countries A through Z, at locations, areas, and states, every single place the human species body has a body standing is being and having been used by a breaching method, measuring and maintaining. No one realized how it uses everybody. Blaming other things, others, ourselves, for what it caused and keeps. And then for what that causes and keeps. It uses that to show them that they had roles with itself. And it shows them a little phenomenon they could use to hide that. Not one modern country had possession of their locations, areas, and states' names. And right here is where we can discern it, black pupils. Certain type of victim /hyper victim will change or fake what we said. Or they'll self-value roles with others who do and did that. When we mention how this is about a human factor nature breaching method. In other words, there are history classes. Therefore, every single day, there are people obligated to have the importance of the past here now. And nature shows us that portion of time we know is extent to is truth to an extent always. It also shows us there's a portion of time before that was passed that we know we don't know about. But it also shows us the conjunction between them too. That shows us that we could learn more from it even without research. I mean, using nature's body as research, though. It is inseparable from your research anyway. You guys have been systems tactical to ulterior from its own, however, when it's positive onto itself. And that can be ignored. But it forces leaf of Hades, forced space nature transfer. Not, in other words, worse than death, a special difference transfer. its identity is every opposite too. So where humanity appears to be like draws its sophistication relative to other species bodies, they have no criminal foreign influences. Nature itself shows anyone who had roles with those laws that were entrenched with colonies and with early states and with states now. They are criminally foreign influence. They're criminal insidiousness nature for nature itself. Nature shows a shell game with the people that are counters to the sexual predators with the kids. And speaking about their mental health, supposed to be as mental health experts. All kinds of natures of organized crimes with medicines, with people at Hartford Hospital, and forging names of doctors, roles with all natures of crime scenes, and investigators originally and still constantly use criminally foreign influence, tactically delusions raw, constantly roles fabricating and changing what's actually recorded, putting fake ties and natures of ties between people and their own kids, involved with them. Readings of statutes and precedents with prosecutors and judges, criminally foreign influence, mixing their kids' involvements, collusions with them, predicate acts before that, show them they need to hide that by colluding with people being brought before them, increasingly in criminally foreign influence, tactical delusions, wrought ways, as time collusions with overt criminal enterprises, private ones, terrorists. There's a shock and awe that wants to pretend morality anyway at the other end of other things others ourselves blame for we really caused wars. For why and how people use their knowledge of good and evil to force a nature debate that leaves out the hyper evidential. This new nature of evidence is here. YouTuber Anthony Wall, we're showing you. Nature shows us its body. We are not the ones, nor are the other species bodies that invented how even fish have two eyes. Quality aspects of nature, distinct, non-distinct, and simultaneous / hyper simultaneous. Witch trials are about all sides of the criminal and civil cases, could be and were. Collusion as fact treatment nature styles. Also with subject treatments, like witch trials, leaving out how slavery was entrenched in northern colonies, southern colonies, leaving out how a torture method, sensing method was involved with that, leaving out how the other countries that were involved with that were themselves being tortured, extorted, and fact treatment nature enslaved, leaving out where and how, why really. England doesn't remember the history of English grammar properly. See, this put everyone into postures and then sustain that with no one thinking. And then it shows them how they need to defend themselves by self-valuing roles with all groupings of humanity, increasingly self-valued, grouped tactical terror from how nature did, but needing to pretend that, that's all there is. Meanwhile, we're all in suburbs that were designed before cars. In the suburbs, you can't even grow for food, tactically to nature, let alone the cities. And the suburban / urban, and the difference is used remotely, where syntax natures A through Z are used remotely, or that body is sensed, including if that body is a majority of people, including if that body is the entire country, at countries A through Z, including if it is any grouping from it. It is styles of fact treatment nature entertained at locations, areas, and states, having already communicated, having had self-value roles with other being and having been communicated for when nature actually communicated to us with and as each age of fact treatment nature. And next to each location, including campuses and databases, locations, and then further campuses. This is a conscious possession and use / S of roles that even they don't realize the names of the people, the sciences, and of their nature as criminal insidiousness nature, relative to where and to how, too, with the answers, how they could have left out and not discerned and replaced people with passions and emotions behind keeping other things, others, ourselves forced to be blamed for things that humanity, our founders, and that nature itself communicated for us to blame on a human fact, human nature breaching method that was entrenched. Sickly northern colonies and southern colonies. Again, vaccine. I could just things, but long. So in other words, all we have to do is stop the in other words, there are progressions with wars and with responses to weapons and natures of industries where the only where there's economics and the only means to cause positive value nature progressions, acts and natures are furthering natures of logic and names that are directed to hide secrets that are not even real secrets. And that's just collusions with the criminally foreign influence uses of locations, law, and convictions by that, where it's not informal too. This is why it's also relative where there are time collusions, the difference of who is guilty and when, with overt criminal enterprises, private ones, all sides of criminal and civil cases, other involved with the same ones, and news at the same time. And all foreign and domestic planting identity differences rackets, fake perception of the relativity of cultural differences. This is a cultural racketeering method worse than war crimes. That's another thing true always that nature and that our founders communicated for us to understand this breaching method was about. Black people, it is time. Prepare the mind. Vaccines. So they're trying to force leaders by attacking them too. To blame other things, to keep other things, others ourselves blamed for what is hyper criminal foreign influences at all locations, areas, and states. Not just criminal foreign influences, because the criminal foreign influences are also only manifest because of relative to how nature has us grouped as systems tactical ulterior than we are formally allowed to be appreciated as. Increasingly, though, hyper additionally from off those locations, from off all locations /s, then further self-value collusion /s with that having been. Where and how the naive quality of fact human nature, aspects of fact human nature, it's gotten away with is relative to how self-value roles of wire and mail crime methods, the interbranch and foreign have, whole mail crime and wire crime methods, and whole predicate acts methods, black pupils. At the same time with the interbranch foreign, in other words, differences rackets. And their identities are at locations. And they hurt people with facts. And they make people collude with them. So they make it polite where someone's going to have to hurt them back with facts for someone to say that they don't want to hurt the people. Increasingly, next to campuses, they have people involved with collusions with that. With all natures of investigations, investigators associated with, like with courts and their state judicial and corrections officers. All kinds of criminally foreign influence uses of those people. And where they go back and forth on who said what and when, what, why they're asking. Here. Respond, it means appear, vaccines. I'll show us how.